Good evening. Wherever you are in the world, whether this night has just begun or whether sleep is already close, you are welcome here. Tonight, the sea is quiet. No storms, no thunder. Only the slow breath of the ocean and the presence of an ancient god. This is the night Poseidon did not rage. This is the night he calmed the sea. If stories like this help you slow your thoughts, if ancient myths bring you peace rather than noise, you may gently subscribe, so you can return here on many quiet nights to come. Now, let the world grow distant. Let the waves soften, and listen. As the sea remembers Poseidon on a moonless night long ago. Somewhere between the islands of Delos and Rhodes, the sea fell utterly silent. Not just calm, silent. No waves lapping, no wind sighing, no creak of wood or flutter of sailcloth. Just a vast, motionless body of water, stretched under a sky so dark it felt like the gods had turned their backs. The sailors aboard the Agonia, a merchant vessel carrying olive oil and obsidian, stood still as statues. They dared not speak, not out of fear of storms, but because there were no storms. And that was worse. They knew what this meant. It wasn't peace. It was a god watching. Poseidon, Earthshaker, Lord of the Deep, Stormbringer. He was never known for mercy. He was the wave that swallowed fleets, the scream in the gale, the fury behind every wreck. Yet this was different. There was no rage in the air, no wrath, just silence, as if Poseidon had held his breath, as if the ocean itself was unsure what came next. And in that silence, stories began. This is the story of the night Poseidon calmed the sea. But before we understand why, we must first understand what it meant. To the ancient Greeks, the sea was not a place of escape or beauty. It was a grave waiting to open. The moment a ship left port, it entered the Poseidon's realm. Sailors knew this. Fishermen knew this. Even kings knew this. You could offer goats, bulls, even gold, but no offering guaranteed safe passage. That's why silence terrified them more than storms. Storms meant Poseidon was angry. Silence, that meant he was thinking. The sea was life to the coastal cities of the ancient world. Trade routes, warfare, even diplomacy moved across Poseidon's floor. But no man controlled the tide. Only the god did. And the god was fickle. He could be generous, yes, but never predictable. An ocean at rest was like a predator crouched in wait. There are no temples built to a silent sea. There are no hymns for calm waters. Storms earned prayers. Wrath earned temples. Sailors carried amulets and scratched tridents onto their hulls, not for blessing, but for survival. The idea of a sea that chose not to strike was disturbing. In Homer's Odyssey, it is Poseidon who delays Odysseus' return home for 10 years, not because of a grand plan, but because he was insulted. One mortal blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and for that, an entire crew suffered. This was the Poseidon known to the world, powerful, brutal, easily offended. So imagine what it meant when this Poseidon, this divine engine of chaos, went quiet. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't mercy. It was a moment. Intentional, deliberate, timed. Some say it happened only once. Others say it was a night that repeats every 1,000 years. A sacred pause in the turning of waves. But all agree on this. It was no accident. Something or someone stopped Poseidon's hand. There's an inscription in a ruined coastal temple near Euboea, carved into stone worn smooth by centuries of salt air. It reads simply, "When the sea slept, we wept." No other context, no date, just those words. But every scholar who sees it says the same thing. It refers to the night. The most enduring version of a tale begins with a ship, its name already an omen. Sailing east under favorable winds, it met a sudden dead calm near the island of Patmos. It was midnight when the lookout stopped shouting, when the torches refused to stay lit, when the captain, a veteran of 2 wars and 3 storms, dropped to his knees and whispered a name no sailor spoke aloud after dark. Enosicthan, the Earthshaker, Poseidon himself. The silence spread. Birds that had followed the ship vanished. Clouds froze. Dolphins stopped leaping. The sea became a mirror of black glass, perfectly smooth. But beneath that glass, something stirred. The crew claimed to hear it, not with ears, but in their bones. A humming, a pressure, as if the ocean had become one giant lung, waiting. Waiting for what? For judgment? For an arrival? For an end? They say even time seemed to stretch thin. 1 hour passed like a whole day. Men aged in thought. One sailor broke and began to scream, not from pain, but because he swore he saw a face staring back at him from beneath the water. Not monstrous, human, eyes the color of deep sapphire, unmoving. Some say it was the night a god mourned. Some say Poseidon lost something that day, perhaps a lover, a child, a secret oath broken by Zeus himself. Others believe he saw a vision of the future, a time when no one would fear him, when ships would run on steam and steel, and his temples would crumble into museum fragments. Maybe he saw his own obsolescence. Maybe for one night he accepted it. There are darker tales, versions where Poseidon did not calm the sea out of sorrow, but as a test, to see what mortals would do in the absence of terror, to see if given peace, they would still remember him. They did not. The crew of the Agonia spoke of wine shared, of laughter returning by morning, of daring to dance on deck, of believing they had been spared. By nightfall the next day, the ship was gone. Only a floating crate of obsidian was ever found. No wreckage, no bodies, just the black stone, like a marker, like an answer. And some say the crate had been engraved with a symbol no one dared translate. But this story is not a warning. It's a mystery. One carved into oral tradition, woven into Athenian theater, whispered by priests at Delphi. One that has survived in fragments, scattered across 12 texts, 100 retellings. In some versions, it ends with the sea erupting in fury the next day. In others, it never returned to full rage again. But all end the same way, with silence and the feeling of being watched. Tonight, we gather those fragments, not to explain, but to remember. Because on that night, the sea did not rage, it watched, and we have been watching it back ever since. To understand the silence, you must first understand the storm. Poseidon was not merely a god. He was an element made flesh. Not just the ruler of the sea, but the sea itself. His moods were tides. His fury, hurricanes. His thoughts stirred whirlpools. And when he was ignored, coastlines paid the price. He was not born of the sea. Ironically, Poseidon came from the sky, son of Kronos and Rhea, swallowed and later regurgitated like the rest of his Olympian siblings. But when the gods divided the world after overthrowing their father, Zeus took the sky, Hades took the underworld, and Poseidon was given the sea. Some say he accepted it, others say he claimed it by force. Either way, he made it his. Worshipped in port cities and feared by inland farmers when droughts came, Poseidon held more than just aquatic authority. Earthquakes were his doing. Horses, too, were said to be his creation. In some myths, he struck the ground with his trident, and up sprang the first steed, wild, restless, untamable, a perfect reflection of him. His symbols, tridents, dolphins, bulls, appear everywhere, from Mycenaean ruins to later Roman mosaics. But it wasn't the art that immortalized him. It was the fear. Poseidon was not just dangerous to mortals. He was dangerous to other gods. His rivalry with Athena over Athens is legendary. When both offered gifts to win favor, Poseidon drove his trident into the rock and summoned a saltwater spring. Athena, more subtle, offered the olive tree. The people chose her gift. Poseidon never forgot the insult. From then on, he opposed her at every chance. During the Trojan War, during Odysseus' voyage, during moments lost to time. The gods were immortal, but their grudges aged like wine, richer, deeper, more bitter. He fathered monsters, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the sea serpent Cetus, the giant Antaeus, and countless other beings that blurred the line between divine and abomination. Yet, not all his children were terrifying. Some were kings, heroes. Even the legendary Theseus was said to be Poseidon's son. But Poseidon loved like a storm, sudden, violent, gone. He chased goddesses and mortals alike. He battled for love, seduced by force, and left chaos in his wake. Entire cities fell because of his passions. Temples were built not out of love, but to keep him away. And still, the sea was his favorite child. Every wave, every current, every crash on the shore was his breath. To the Greeks, no voyage began without an offering. Sailors cast coins, wine, even live animals into the sea. The larger the ship, the larger the sacrifice. Those who ignored him found their vessels shattered against unseen rocks, or simply missing. And no one questioned why. Poseidon did not explain. He simply acted. The ancients did not call him god of the sea like a modern title. They called him Inosikon, Earthshaker, Pelagaios, of the sea, Hepios, of horses, Geakos, holder of the earth. He was force incarnate. He was not prayed to for favor. He was begged for mercy. In the Iliad, Poseidon defied Zeus himself, siding with the Greeks. At one point, he even threatens open rebellion. Few dared such things. Even fewer survived them. But Poseidon was second only to Zeus in raw power, and he knew it. His storms could destroy empires. His moods could shatter coastlines. He once flooded the land of Attica out of vengeance. Another time, he lifted an entire island from the sea. Even cities allied with him lived in uneasy peace. You might worship Poseidon, but you never assumed he cared. There are ancient texts, lesser known, buried in footnotes and fragmented scrolls, that speak of Poseidon during his wanderings, of times he walked among mortals, cloaked as a fisherman, of times he whispered to kings in their sleep, urging them to send ships into cursed waters. In these tales, Poseidon is not just a god, but a shadow, an urge, a voice behind every sailor's nightmare. He didn't need to roar. He only needed to be. It's easy to imagine him as monstrous. But that's a mistake. Poseidon was not cruel for cruelty's sake. He was primal, natural. The sea doesn't weep when it takes a life. It simply moves. That was Poseidon. Movement, relentless, tidal, beyond comprehension. And so the idea of him choosing stillness, that wasn't peace. It was pressure, like the moment before an eruption, the breath before the plunge. The stillness of the sea wasn't a gift. It was a question. What had changed? What had paused a force that had never been known to stop? For the ancients, this wasn't just strange. It was unholy. It broke the rules of the world, and when rules break in the realm of gods, consequences follow. Poseidon did not sleep. He did not rest. If he went silent, it was because he was deciding. That's why the night he calmed the sea wasn't just terrifying, it was prophetic. The Asur gods ruled from marble temples. They ruled from water. For thousands of years, long before the names of Poseidon or Neptune were carved into stone, men stared into the sea and knew one truth. They were not alone. The ocean had moods. The ocean had memory. And the ocean had rules. You could not cross it without permission. You could try, but the sea always decided whether you returned. To be a sailor in the ancient world was to live with death as your crewmate. Wooden ships creaked under the weight of hope and cargo. Winds came and vanished without warning. The stars guided you only if clouds allowed, and beneath it all, the Poseidon stirred. Not just a name whispered in fear, but a living, breathing presence in every spray of salt. Before departure, offerings were made, not always grand. A coin tossed into the shallows, a cup of unmixed wine poured at the dock, a whispered vow to build a shrine if the voyage was safe. On wealthier ships, animals were sacrificed. Goats, bulls, even horses. Throats slit, blood spilled onto the shore or directly into the sea. The darker the waves, the bigger the sacrifice. Sailors believed Poseidon needed reminders. If you didn't give him something to take, he might take everything. The Greek city of Corinth, a major naval power, was known for its temple to Poseidon overlooking the harbor. It wasn't decorated in gold. It was simple, stark. The priests didn't chant with joy, they begged. Because Poseidon's love was indistinguishable from his rage. Storms weren't just weather events. They were divine signals. A sudden gale wasn't bad luck. It was punishment. And like all punishments from gods, it had reasons mortals couldn't always understand. Maybe the ship carried someone cursed. Maybe the captain blasphemed in his youth. Maybe Poseidon was angry with another god, and your ship simply sailed into the crossfire. The sea didn't explain itself. It simply swallowed you. Ancient naval logs, often overlooked by modern historians, contain pages of delays due to superstition. Captains refusing to leave port because dolphins didn't appear that morning. Crews demanding a delay after spotting a blood-red moon. Ships turning back because a single gull followed them too long. These weren't cowardice. They were survival instincts, shaped by generations of fear. In the Aegean, islanders told stories of the gray wave, a ghostly swell that rose with no wind, no current. It moved against the tide. If it passed beneath your vessel, you were safe. If it passed beside you, you vanished by dawn. No one ever saw it twice. The Phoenicians, master sailors of the ancient world, had their own version of Poseidon. They called him Yam, and he too was feared. Even in distant Egypt, storms at sea were blamed on divine wrath. The further you looked, the more you found this truth. Every culture knew the sea was divine, and that divinity demanded respect. Respect paid in blood, coin, or prayer. But not all rituals were formal. Sailors carried tokens, scraps of old rope, carved fish bones, bits of driftwood said to be from wrecks that miraculously returned. They believed these things confused the sea, reminded it that they'd already been marked. They wore blue sashes to blend with the water, or tattooed waves on their arms to show they belonged. Superstition? Yes, but every ship that ignored these customs earn its place in ghost stories. The Romans inherited these fears and formalized them. Under Augustus, Roman ships performed standard sacrifices before launch. A priest aboard would chant invocations, and if the sea seemed too quiet, they sometimes postponed departure, because silence was worse than noise. A calm sea didn't mean a safe voyage. It meant Poseidon was paying attention. To be born in a port city meant being taught fear early. Children were told bedtime stories of angry tides and cursed sailors. Girls tossed wreaths into the sea on holy days, hoping for good husbands and calm waters. Always were warned never to swim too far, because that was how Poseidon found you. Not in the storm, but in the silence. When storms did come, they were like living creatures. Black clouds stretching their claws across the sky. Lightning flashing like tridents hurled in rage. Thunder that didn't roll, it screamed. And always waves that towered higher than the sails, as if the sea itself wanted to stand upright and look into the eyes of those who dared cross it. Many gods were loved. Poseidon was survived. And this is why the night he calmed the sea shattered every rule. There was no offering, no sacrifice, no ritual, no explanation. It was as if the god paused, not to forgive, but to observe, to test, and perhaps to remember. Long before the night came, it was spoken of in fragments. A priest in Chios dreamt of waves standing still. A fisherman in Delos cast his net and pulled at dust. An oracle at Didyma, shaking with divine seizure, muttered words that would later be scratched into a temple wall. When the god ceases, the sea shall stare back. Most laughed, some prayed, but none forgot. Prophecy in the ancient world was never delivered with clarity. The gods didn't hand down warnings wrapped in certainty. They murmured. They hinted. They concealed the future inside riddles and symbols, testing whether mortals could interpret them or not. And in the weeks before the sea went still, their whispers became thunder. The skies above the Cyclades shifted. Stars flickered out mid-pattern, only to return in new alignments. Priests in Kos documented a trembling in the heavens that did not reach the ground. Lightning danced across clear skies with no thunder to follow. In Rhodes, a newly built statue of Poseidon cracked down the middle, splitting his face in two. The temple guards swore the stone bled saltwater. No one approached it again. Storms vanished from the charts of seasoned navigators. Not moved, not delayed. Vanished. Windless days became common. The air carried a strange heaviness, like the weight of a secret pressing against your chest. Sacrificial flames refused to rise on holy altars, no matter the wood, no matter the offerings. And at sea, the strangest reports of all came from sailors who knew the water like a second home. They spoke of silence, not just above, but below, as if the ocean itself had forgotten how to breathe. A merchant galley returning from Egypt claimed their oars made no splash. They passed over currents and felt none. One sailor noted in his log, it was like rowing across glass stretched over the eyes of something watching. A Roman trireme documented 3 days of a perfectly still horizon, with no shift in the clouds, no ripple on the surface. The men aboard began whispering Poseidon's name, then stopped, realizing he might be listening. But strangest of all were the stories from the island of Tinos. There, children stopped speaking at night. They simply sat by the water, listening, In Athens, the historian Pherecydes wrote in his private journal, "Something comes, then it is not a war. It is a gaze. It watches before it strikes." Weeks later, he was found face down in the harbor, lungs filled not with seawater, but air. His final note read only, "We have forgotten the price." Omens poured across the Aegean. Black doves fell dead from the sky, their wings coated in brine. Dolphins, known to give good luck, swam in tight, agonized circles and then vanished from the coasts. An entire village near Mykonos woke to find every well dry and every wave on the beach frozen mid-crest. The villagers fled inland and never returned. No explanation. Only watchers. Oracles at Delphi, once the most vocal interpreters of divine will, shut their doors. When pressured, a priestess whispered a single message to a Spartan envoy. "Even Poseidon has a secret he cannot drown." The message was sent to Sparta and Macedon. It never arrived. The messenger's boat drifted ashore. Sails folded, hull unbroken, yet completely empty. Old sailors warned of this moment. Stories passed down on wine-stained lips and salt-weathered decks. They spoke of gods who sometimes paused before punishing, that the sea could quiet itself before it consumed, that when the waves halted, it wasn't mercy, it was focus. They had a name for it: the night of the glare, a moment when the sea no longer moved because something beneath it had opened its eyes. One legend tells of a blind harpist in Ephesus who, during a spring festival, played a melody so haunting the tide reversed for 10 minutes. When basked where he learned it, he said, "I heard it in my dreams. The god played it for me." That night, he vanished. Only his harp remained, wet, covered in barnacles, its strings still humming. Temples across the Mediterranean felt it. Fires flickered low, statues cracked in their sockets. In a sanctuary near Corinth, a stone altar to Poseidon began weeping salt. A priestess who touched the tears claimed she saw a face, not angry, but sad. She was blind by morning. Cities sent envoys to the gods for clarity. Delphi, Dodona, Ephyra, all reported the same thing. Silence. It was as if Olympus itself held its breath. And in that breathless pause, one ship prepared to sail. The Agonia. Not a warship, not a sacred barge, a merchant vessel. Weathered, patched, scarred. But it carried something valuable. Obsidian carved from the volcanic heart of Thera. Black stone set to echo with the voice of Hades himself. Some whispered of his mind from forbidden caves, the places where nymphs once cried. Some said the cargo was cursed. Others said it was an offering. Its destination, Ionia. Its route through Poseidon's heart. The night before its voyage, the captain visited a seer. Not a high priestess, just an old woman who lived near the docks, speaking in riddles and feeding pigeons wine. She refused to speak, only handed a cracked tile carved with one word: wait. He left at dawn anyway, because obsidian pays more than warnings. Because gods don't speak to sailors until they do. There were watchers on the cliffs that night. Farmers, fishermen, slaves, soldiers. No explanation, no summons, just a feeling, as if they had to bear witness to something ancient returning. They stood, eyes fixed on the black horizon, and they saw it. The Gagania moved into silence. Its sail went limp. Its wake vanished behind it. The stars above, gone. The sea below, glass. One child asked her mother, "Is the sea asleep?" She didn't answer. Then, all across the islands, the same thing happened. Dogs did not bark. Birds did not fly. The wind forgot how to move, and no wave touched the shore. A hush swept across the Aegean, not like sleep, but like a held breath. This was the night foretold. It had been written in dreams and seen in smoke. It had been sung in drunken songs and feared in sailors' tales. The gods had warned them, but the gods do not shout, they whisper, and mortals rarely listen until the silence comes. The Agonia was not built for legend. She was a vessel of trade, low-decked, salt-rusted, stitched together from timbers older than her captain. Her sails bore patches from battles with storms, not enemies. Her hull creaked like old bones, and her prow no longer carried a figurehead, only a stain where one had been. She was not sacred. She was not damned. She was simply chosen. When the Agonia departed from the port of Naxos, the sea was already strange. The tide moved wrong, too slow, too thick, as though reluctant to let her go. Dock hands struggled with lines that refused to sink, floating stiff on the surface like snakes of rope petrified mid-movement. Nets tangled for no reason. A gull crashed into the sail before takeoff. No one spoke. Captain Damon, known more for his bluntness than his faith, waved the signs away. "Wind carries cargo, not curses," he said. But even he fell quiet when the anchor wouldn't sink. The first hour passed in silence. The crew avoided conversation. Even the usual sea chatter, jokes, oaths, songs died on their lips. The wind died next. No breeze, but the sail held shape. By noon, the helmsman reported something strange. The sea beneath the ship wasn't reflecting the sky. It was darker, deeper, like a mirror turned inward. Day 2 brought the first event. The lookout saw what he claimed were sea serpents, not rising, but circling beneath the hull. Thin trails of white foam looped endlessly, though the water remained still. The helmsman refused to steer at night. He claimed the wheel whispered, not in words, but in breath. Cold, rhythmic, like something exhaling just beneath the planks. He began tying knots into his beard for protection. Each knot, a silent prayer to an unnamed god. By the third day, the sea turned gray, not like a storm, but like smoke stretched thin. The sun rose, yet the light reached only halfway down the mast. The deck grew cold. The cook threw all their salted fish overboard. "Already gone rotten," he muttered. "He doesn't want gifts. He's fasting." The crew said nothing. The fourth night brought weeping. A rower, silent since departure, began sobbing without sound. His eyes were open, fixed. He pointed overboard, repeating only, "They're waiting." When approached, he screamed once, then jumped. No splash, no ripples, just absence, like a name erased from parchment. Captain Damon recorded nothing that night. His logbook remained blank. But a scrap of parchment was later found, jammed between two deck planks. It read, "Stillness is louder than thunder." No handwriting could be matched to it. By dawn on the 5th day, the sea no longer moved. Not drift, not tide, not life. The Sneagonias stood surrounded by silence so complete it seemed to press against the ears. Sound vanished. Voices carried nowhere. Even thought, some said, became hard to hear. The sea beneath was flat, reflective, unnatural. The crew described it as a ceiling turned upside down. Some began to walk differently, as though afraid to step too hard, as if they might break it. That evening, the stars blinked out, one by one. Not behind clouds. They vanished in place. The crew stood on deck, looking upward, but saw no sky, only a darkness that moved, as if something vast was rising, blocking the heavens. One sailor, young and thankful to Athena, tried to chant a hymn. The words came out backwards. He stopped and vomited salt water. Captain Damon gave his final order. Hold position. Say nothing. Look nowhere. They obeyed, not out of discipline, out of instinct. On the 6th morning, blackbirds arrived. They circled once, twice, and landed on the mast and railings. Silent, watching. Their feathers were dull, dusted in what looked like ash. No one dared shoo them away. By sunset, they were gone. No feathers, only bones, arranged in the shape of a trident at the base of the mast. The crew gathered around it. No one moved it. They left it as it was. That night, the ship's logs ended, not with a written line, but a single burn mark across the parchment. A perfect circle, smooth, crisp, as if something round and hot had kissed the leather page. No one knew when it appeared, only that it was the last thing recorded. What happened next is not known, but stories spread. A fisherman off the coast of Samos swore he saw the Agonia adrift, its sails full of invisible wind. No crew, no birds, just motion, and then gone. A Mycenaean diver reported finding the vessel whole on the floor of a shallow reef, upright as if parked. He returned with scholars. The ship was gone. But his fingernails were black for the rest of his life. In Delos, a priestess entered trance and screamed for 7 minutes straight, then collapsed. She remembered nothing, except one phrase etched into her thoughts. The god looked up. A crate of obsidian, tightly bound in rope, washed ashore near a ruined temple, dry, unscathed. Inside, the stones were cold, so cold they burned. Those who touched them reported dreams of drowning beneath a flat sky. Carved into the crate's bottom was a single phrase: he remembers. The Agonia never returned. No debris, no crew, no sound, only the whispers and the fear. Her name became taboo in port cities, never spoken near calm water. Sailors refused to christen new ships with names beginning in A. In certain islands, children were caught not to stare into the sea at night, because the sea might stare back. Among sailors, the story was passed in pieces. The stillness, the birds, the eyes in the water. But always it ended the same way. Not with death, with awareness. Poseidon did not rage. He did not destroy. He simply paused. And when the gods pause, mortals tremble. Mortals saw stillness, but on Olympus there was a storm. The gods rarely agreed. They rarely met. But on the eve of the calm sea, the divine council was called, not by Zeus, not by Apollo, but by Poseidon. And that, more than anything, disturbed them. They gathered not in ceremony, but in silence. From every realm they came. Hera from her golden throne, perfume trailing behind rage barely contained. Apollo arrived with music trailing like sunlight, though he plucked no strings. Artemis stood at the edge, wrapped in shadow and bark, silent as a hunted breath. Demeter walked barefoot, vines curling in her wake. Hades did not come. He never did, but even his absence spoke. Athena was last, clothed not in armor, but still a weapon. Her presence did not echo, it struck. Her gaze found Poseidon immediately and did not blink. Poseidon stood in the center, salt crusted his brow. Water dripped from his beard like blood from a blade. The air around him shimmered, not with heat, but pressure, like standing at the bottom of a trench carved in time. He did not arrive by path. He rose from sea, from silence, from memory. He spoke no greeting. He simply placed his trident on the marble floor. The stone hissed, cracked, wept. "Why summon us?" Hera asked. Her voice was honey steeped in judgment. Poseidon did not turn to her. He looked at Zeus and spoke low. "The sea is tired." A hush fell that even gods could feel. Not confusion, not outrage. Just stillness, so absolute it bordered on ancient. Apollo broke it, as he always did. The sea does not tire. It moves. Poseidon shook his head. It obeys. He paused, but it remembers. Athena stepped forward, her tone surgical. "What are you planning?" Poseidon turned slowly. His gaze, black as a kiss, clear as fate, met hers. "You stole a city from me," he said. "You gave them salt," she replied. "I gave them olives, wisdom, victory. You gave them pride. You gave them fear." Zeus raised a hand. Lightning flickered in his palm. Not threat, but punctuation. "We are not here to debate Athens." Poseidon's voice roughened. "This is not about Athens." He pointed. Not up, not down, but outward. To the world, to mortals. They map my waters. They drag nets through sacred trenches. They dive for pearls meant to remain unseen. They name what they do not understand. And worst of all, he paused, letting the air grow cold. "They do not ask permission." Hermes scoffed. "Mortals have always taken. Then they drown." Poseidon didn't smile. "They do not drown in fear, they drown in certainty." Demeter frowned. "They are hungry. They are hollow. They chase coins, not harvests." Artemis stepped into moonlight. "They hunt without hunger." Hera's voice dropped low. "They forget who we are." At that, Poseidon gripped his trident tighter, and the clouds in the sky above even Olympus began to roll. Not in anger, in warning. Ares, licking his lips, leaned forward. "Do you seek war?" Poseidon didn't blink. "No." "Then what?" "Witness." Athena stepped closer, brow furrowed. "You paused the tide." "I did." "You stopped the winds." "I did." "You calmed the waves." "I did." "And you did not ask." Poseidon's face was still. There was no one left to ask. A silence fell, deeper than before. Even the gods knew not how to answer that. Hestia spoke next. She who seldom left the hearth. Her voice barely above a whisper. "If you unmake the sea, you unmake all things." Poseidon did not meet her gaze. "I will not unmake it." He looked through them, into something far older. "I will let it watch." Zeus rose. The sky above Olympus dimmed slightly. "You cannot act alone." Poseidon smiled, faint and terrible. "I already have." The fire beside Hestia dimmed. Leaves stilled on trees that did not grow. The very air slowed, as if the world held its breath. "The agonia sails," Poseidon said. Those words echoed, once, twice, and vanished. Athena's eyes narrowed. "You used them?" "No." He paused. "I invited them." A murmur passed through the council. Hera bristled. Apollo's lyre thrummed, though untouched. Hermes vanished, then reappeared, unnerved. "The mortals do not know," said Artemis. Poseidon nodded. "They will." "You play with balance," Zeus warned. "The sea is the scale." Poseidon turned, finally facing them all. "You rule from sky. You walk upon earth. I bear the depth. My silence is not surrender. He stepped back, letting the trident fall. The marble cracked. From it, salt water bloomed, not as flood, but as a slow rising breath. A memory. Knelt by it, touched it, withdrew her hand, fingers pale. It remembers. Silence returned. Olympus did not shake, it listened. What broke the moment was not thunder, but prophecy. A single whisper carried on no wind, from no god, spoken in every voice and none. When even gods fall still, beware the sea that opens its eyes. The council broke that night, not in war, in uncertainty. And gods do not fear many things. They fear what they do not control. Then Poseidon no longer asked permission, and the sky dimmed. And in Olympus, the gods no longer spoke of tides, because some storms do not roar. They simply wait. It came from the edges of maps, old sailors, blind prophets, children who hadn't yet learned what not to say. They came whispering of calm tides, of ships that vanished without a ripple, of the way the sea no longer made noise, only presence. Most were ignored, madmen, drunks, storytellers, but a few, just a few, were listened to, because their eyes didn't blink when they spoke, and their voices never rose above a whisper. One was a priest, long retired, who arrived in Delphi barefoot and soaked, though there had been no rain for days. He said nothing for hours, then only this: the wave did not crash, it listened. When asked what he meant, he screamed until his voice broke, and then died before morning. Another was a girl from a fishing village where the seaweed had grown in perfect spirals for 6 days. She claimed the ocean whispered her name each time she tried to sleep. She drew patterns in the sand no one recognized, until a scholar from Crete matched them to markings found on an ancient shipwreck. A ship they called Agonia. In the hills above Thera, a shepherd vanished for 3 days. He returned at dawn, eyes bloodshot, silent. He did not speak again, but he carved a trident into stone with only his fingernails. His hands bled for hours. A scribe in Corinth began copying documents backward, perfectly mirrored letter by letter. When asked why, he said the sea had reversed direction and writing must follow. He drowned a week later, in his own well. These were not prophecies. They were echoes, reverberations of a silence too large for the human mind. In Mycenae, a weaver began tying knots into her threads that she could not explain. When the pattern was unraveled and copied, it matched seismic waveforms seen only in deep-sea tremors. The knots foretold earthquakes before they occurred. Her final tapestry was hung in a temple. It burned without flame during a windless night. A wandering poet sang a song in a dialect no one recognized. The tune unsettled animals. Crops withered. The priest who heard it went blind for 3 days. When the song was transcribed, the pattern resembled wave motion, except the waves folded inward, not out. One scholar proposed a theory. Poseidon had not calmed the sea. He had opened it, revealed it, removed the mask. The surface, he claimed, had always lied. The silence was not absence. It was unveiling. In a tavern on Rhodes, an old sailor swore he'd watched the horizon curl upward, said the stars vanished one by one, as if swallowed by a dome. When mocked, he smiled. "I've seen gods blink," he said. Then he walked into the sea and never came back. The most terrifying witnesses were those who returned normal. No raving, no visions, no trembling. They simply stared at water and never sailed again. They would not explain, only say, "He's watching." They tried to give it a name, the quiet surge, the still wake. the watching tide. But none stayed, none felt right. Because you cannot name what does not want to be known. Some built shrines, small ones made of driftwood and teeth. Others left offerings, black stones, salt, broken oars, not for favor, for mercy. A merchant tossed coins into the harbor, praying aloud for protection. The water spat them back, clean, warm, dry. He sold his ship the next day and left the coast forever. A mute boy in Lesbos drew a spiral with 3 prongs into every piece of wood he found. Doors, tables, his own skin. It was not until much later that a priest identified it. A symbol once painted on Poseidon's deepest temple, now lost to the sea. Across the world, oceans behaved strangely. Currents reversed without reason. Ships drifted for days in circles, their compasses useless. Whales washed ashore with eyes wide open and lungs dry. Sailors dreamed of standing on endless black mirrors, unable to move, unable to scream. And in the deepest parts of the sea, pressure changed, as if something massive had begun to breathe. In Athens, a philosopher wrote a scroll in secret. It was found years later, sealed in a ceramic jar sunk in olive oil. It read, "We used to fear the sea because we did not understand it. Now we understand. There is something to fear." In Sparta, warriors halted naval training for a full season. When pressed, their commander simply said, "The tide no longer accepts us." In Delos, an oracle refused to bathe. When forced, she screamed at the water, "I am not worthy to be seen." And in a temple ruin, a coin was discovered, not forged by man. Its marking showed a ship with no crew and eyes beneath the hull. No one could trace the metal. It pulsed when touched. A legend arose of the salt-eyed man. Some claimed he walked the docks at night, dripping wet with no footprints left behind. Some claimed he asked no questions, only listened. When spoken to, he would say one phrase, "He is awake." Others claimed that Poseidon himself had withdrawn, not in wrath, but in regard, that he stood beneath the waves and looked, and listened, and waited. In quiet coves, under stars that watch too closely, a few still hear it. The hush, the breath, the weight. Not a god's wrath, not a curse. Just the kind of stillness that means something vast has turned to look. And when the sea watches, you don't run, you don't scream. You hold your breath and hope it blinks. They don't talk about Poseidon anymore. Not in temples, not in ports, not even in myth. His name remains, but only as echo, etched in stone tablets, forgotten behind moss, drowned beneath new stories. It's not taboo. It's something worse, irrelevant. When the sea went quiet, the world changed. Not in floods, not in tsunamis, not in screams, but in pause, a divine breath held too long. A question so complete that the world bent around it. Sailors still sail, but their rituals are different. They no longer ask for blessings, they ask for permission. They don't toast to safe passage. They whisper to the water, "If you're listening, I mean no harm." Some speak this in foreign tongues, older than they know. Some don't speak at all, just bow their heads as they step on deck. And some refuse to sail altogether. Ports change too. Some paint their ships with wide eyes, watching eyes. Others break their oars before docking, so the sea knows they won't return without cause. In remote villages, parents teach children not to point at calm water, not because it's rude, but because it might look back. There are new rules. No naming a ship after a god. No carving tridents into wood, no tossing coins into the water without closing your eyes. And never, never say Poseidon at sea. They call him the depth now, or simply him. The old gods faded, not because they were forgotten, but because they had grown quiet. And the sea did not fade. It stayed, but something in it changed. It no longer gave storms to fear. It offered nothing, and that nothing became sacred. Theologists rewrote pantheons. New gods rose, of wind, of trade, of luck, of coin, but not of oceans. No one claims dominion over what now simply is. The sea was no longer a deity. It had become a presence, a witness, a listener. One historian, writing from exile, observed, "When the gods spoke, we feared their voices. Now we fear their silence. Storms still come, but they feel smaller, not because they lack power, but because they are less than what might be, what isn't." Even hurricanes feel like whispers now, side effects, not warnings. No one says Poseidon causes them, but no one says he doesn't allow them either. A new kind of sailor emerged. Silent ones. Superstitious ones. They do not sing. They do not curse. They do not speak the sea's name. They sail and hope it forgets them. They say prayers in silence, pressing their palms to the hull before each voyage. They say nothing if they return, and never explain why they burn their boots. And yet, despite the fear, the caution, the prayers whispered to a god that no longer answers, some still go looking. They chase the Gonia. They chase stories of still waves and vanishing winds, of sails that fold without hands, of tridents etched into coral reefs that weren't there the day before, of water that parts, not with force, but with decision. One crew claimed they saw her, a black silhouette on the horizon, motionless, sails down. Waves didn't touch her. The air around her bent, not with wind, but with pressure. They turned their ship around. None of them has spoken since. A diver returned with a shard of wood, obsidian black, warm to the touch, and marked with unreadable symbols. When placed in water, it did not float. It stood upright. The scholar who studied it disappeared 3 nights later. His shoes were found dry, but his lungs were full of salt water. Academies tried to explain. They failed. Prophets tried to preach. They were ignored. Poets tried to sing. Their voices broke. Some truths do not echo. They settle, like silt. And so it remained. The sea was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was aware. Every so often, something washes ashore. A coin, a carved stone, a wooden doll soaked in salt and humming, always with the same marking, a closed eye. Sometimes it opens, and when it does, people forget what they saw. But their dreams begin to whisper in waves. In one port, a boy was found carving waves into his own shadow. He claimed he was making it listen. In another, the tides began to mimic the heartbeat of a dying man for 3 days, then stopped completely. No one died, but no one spoke above a whisper for weeks. People no longer fear drowning. They fear being seen. They fear being known. They fear a moment not of pain, but of attention. The gaze of something that sees not bodies, but intent, that judges not by sin, but by sound, and listens for silence. Fishermen now toss their first catch back to the sea, not as offering, as apology. In the halls of dead temples, salt crusts form in the shape of waves. On mountaintops, goats refuse to face east. Monks chant in tones never written down. They do not ask for enlightenment. They ask not to be noticed. And in dreams, across distant lands, the sea now speaks, not in words, but in absence. In dreams with no horizon, in boats that never move, in water that waits for something to break. Some say Poseidon still lives. Others say he died the moment he chose to be still. But most now believe this: he woke and chose to watch. And the sea became his eye. Somewhere far below the deepest depth where light does not reach, where pressure crushes thought, he waits, not with anger, not with mercy, only attention. The sea does not roar. It does not scream. It does not warn. It remembers, and it watches. And should it choose to speak again, there will be no storm, no quakes, or new tsunamis. Only a single perfect moment, still, silent, certain. The surface may ripple, the tide may rise, but beneath it all, the silence endures. And it listens and it waits, not because it must, but because it can. Because once it chose stillness, and the world has never recovered. They came back changed. Not all, but enough to make it impossible to ignore. Some bore scars, not of battle or storm, of stillness, a sort of hollowness in the eyes, as if their gaze had reached too far into calm water and couldn't come all the way back. They walked lighter, not in joy, in caution, as though the earth was no longer solid. Men who once laughed at storms now crossed themselves at puddles. Women who had raised children on docks refused to even hear the sound of waves. Entire towns moved inland, not out of necessity, but unease. The sea had not taken them, but it had watched, and they no longer knew what that meant. Some returned with odd habits, refusing to face west, whispering to cups of water before drinking, breaking mirrors, saying they were too shallow. Sailors wore rope around their wrists, not for safety, but to feel bound, not to the ship, to something deeper. Harbors emptied, boats rotted untouched. Sails were buried like relics, with rites. Children played games without ships. Maps were redrawn, not to avoid the sea, but to unname it. Cartographers replaced the blue with gray. Not land, not sea, just unknown. But the silence followed. Even inland, in valleys far from any shore, it lingered. In wells that filled too quickly. In fog that never left. In dreams that ended with the smell of salt and something beneath it. Animals noticed first. Cattle refused to drink from old troughs. Birds avoided certain rivers. Dogs howled at the sight of rain. Frogs fell silent before sunrise. The forests did not grow quieter. They listened. Priests tried to bless the wind, but their words came out wrong. Writers stopped using the word ocean in poems, and those who still spoke of Poseidon did so only with stones in their mouths. Some communities tried to honor him. They built altars, towers of driftwood, sea glass, and rusted anchors. They left black feathers, dried saltfish, and coins soaked in blood. They sang songs with no melody, only rhythm, mimicking the slow pulse of distant tides. But nothing changed. The sea did not rage. The silence did not lift. It remained, patient, immense, interested. In one city, bells stopped ringing. The sea had never reached it, but the sound had. And now, the sound was not theirs to make. A few people took it differently. They walked barefoot into the tide, lay down, waited. Not to die, not to pray, to listen. Some came back, some didn't. Those who returned said only, "He doesn't need temples." Those few who still sailed did so alone, not because they wished to be, but because they knew what it meant to bring others with them. No farewells, no returns, just drift and breath and hope. Scholars called it hysteria. Seafarers called it balance. Philosophers called it inevitable. No one called it over, because no one believed it was. In the wake of stillness, art changed. Painters stopped depicting waves. Sculptors carved smooth, unbroken stones. Musicians wrote songs that ended mid-note. One play was performed entirely in silence. The audience wept. Temples remained, but became hollow. No hymns, no incense, just wide open doors facing east. Some filled the altars with water. Some let them flood entirely. Children born after the stillness knew different lullabies. They were taught to close their eyes when hearing wind, to answer a knock at the door only if it came 3 times, to say thank you to the sea, even when dry, especially when dry. Villages learned not to speak the name. They called it the listening place, or the deep eye, or simply that which is beneath. When asked why, they only said, "You don't name something that might answer." Boats became rounder, quieter. No figureheads, no decorations, no songs, only silence. Some captains wore blindfolds, not out of blindness, but to avoid making contact. And still, every few years, someone would vanish. Not with screams, not with violence, just absence. Sometimes from shore, sometimes from sleep. And always, always, the sea was still. It wasn't that the sea had stopped being feared. It was that it had become intimate, like the space between breaths, or the pause before someone speaks your name. A waiting that might never end. But if it does, the world will not hear thunder. It will hear its own heartbeat and know it's being heard back. Some say the world has adjusted, that humans like waves adapt. But others say we have merely forgotten the sound of our own silence. And that someday the ocean will remind us, not with wrath, but with return. Not all who lived through it remember clearly, but all who dream do. And in the dreams, the sea is never storming. It is never crashing. It is never loud. It simply is. And it is watching, and it is listening, and it is waiting. And so we wait too, pretending it's over, calling it mythology, laughing at old prayers. But somewhere in every person who has seen the horizon, there's a question that never goes away. What if it opens again? They say it's just a story now. A tale passed down in whispers, shared when no ocean is near, when the night feels long and something unseen brushes against the window pane. Not many tell it anymore. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's heavy, because it tastes of salt and silence. Because once you hear it, part of you starts listening too. The story begins with a storm, or ends with one, or skits the storm altogether and begins with the quiet. A silence so vast that even thunder could not fill it. A silence that arrived not as absence, but as presence. And in that silence, a ship, the Agonia. No one remembers where it came from. Some say it was built from driftwood found on a shore no one has mapped. Others claim it was conjured by Poseidon himself, his final creation, forged from regret and restraint. It was a ship that moved without sails, drifted without wind, and vanished without farewell. There were sailors aboard it once. Men and women with eyes like storm clouds and hands hardened by years of salt and rope. They spoke in riddles and laughed without sound. They feared nothing until the sea stopped answering. Until the water grew still and stayed that way. Not glassy, not calm, but waiting. The god watched them, Or maybe not. Maybe he was asleep, or dying, or evolving. The myths disagree. They say Poseidon did not rage. He simply refrained, withdrew, left the door open behind him, and the sea remained, silent, unmoving, listening. Generations passed, and with them, the story changed. Children turned it into rhyme. Sailors turned it into superstition. Priests turned it into metaphor. Scholars into a footnote. But in some places, it remained sacred. An old fisherman in a fog-covered island once carved the entire myth into the hull of his boat, then set it aflame and walked into the tide. They say the fire didn't spread, it sank, burning still. The myth says the god grew tired, not of worship, but of misunderstanding, of prayers offered like pardons, of fear mistaken for reverence. So he chose silence, not as punishment, but as punctuation. A full stop, a breath drawn in, a gaze too ancient to blink. The myth says one ship went too far, that someone aboard asked too loudly, "What power remains in gods we no longer fear?" And in answering, Poseidon said nothing. And that was the answer. After the stillness, people heard things they hadn't heard before. The groan of ships not rocking, the whisper of guilt, the sound of breath in spaces meant for prayer. They discovered how loud a human heart could be when there was no storm to drown it. They say some worshiped the stillness, built churches with no roofs, offered tears instead of hymns, bowed not to a statue but to the tide. Some fled from it, moved inland, drained lakes, cut rivers into pieces, and gave them new names, as if renaming water could make it forget them. Some drowned, not by waves, but by listening too long, letting the stillness into their minds until the silence spoke louder than their thoughts. And some, just a few, understood it, sat at the edge of the world with feet in the water, waited for nothing, heard everything. Returned not with prophecy, but with peace. In one version of the myth, Poseidon walked ashore in the form of a child. He lives among humans, never remembering who he was, but every night he dreams of tides that wait, and every morning his shadow is wet. In another, the Agania returns, but no one is aboard, only a single note carved into the mast: "You were never alone." In the oldest version, Poseidon never left. He simply turned inward, became the stillness itself, no longer a god, but a mirror, and the sea became his eye. The myth ends differently each time it is told, but always a question remains. What did we do that made a god go quiet? In modern cities, few remember the story in full, but fragments remain. Graffiti on seawalls that simply reads, "Listen." Children's games where the loser must stand still, eyes closed, and wait for the sound of waves, no matter how far from shore. Ceremonies in forgotten towns where people drop a stone into a basin and wait to hear if it echoes. If it doesn't, they say the sea has spoken. If it does, they leave immediately. A sculpture stands in a museum, tall, simple, unmarked, made of driftwood and copper. It leans slightly forward, as if listening. No one knows who made it. But it draws crowds. People speak softer in that room. Some weep. None know why. In lands that never saw ocean, children dream of drowning, not violently, but gently, as if being welcomed or returned. They wake with tears and sand between their fingers. Doctors call it night terror. Priests call it memory. Old sailors say nothing at all. There is a hill in the center of a small island, overgrown with reeds. At its base, a stone slab rests. Too large to move, too smooth to have been carved. When rain touches it, it hums. Only for a second. just long enough for people to hold their breath. They say if you stand on it during a full moon, you can hear waves from below. But there is no sea for miles. And still, the question echoes. What did we do that made a god go quiet? And more importantly, what will he do when he speaks again? Some believe he already has. That every moment of unbearable stillness is a message, not warning, not wrath, just presence. That the sea has become a god-shaped mirror, and in looking at it, we are judged, not by what we say, but by what we allow ourselves to hear. So the myth remains in silence, in stone, in memory, not because it was ever written, but because it was heard. And if you ever find yourself by the shore, with no wind, no gulls, no sound but your own breath, listen carefully. Do not speak. Do not run. Do not pray. Just listen. And if the water stirs, bow your head. Because you are not alone. And you never were. That is the myth that remained. The myth that silenced gods. The myth that did not end in fire or flood, but in attention, the most sacred thing a god can give, and the most unbearable thing a mortal can receive. Some myths ask for belief. This one doesn't. It waits and listens until you do. And maybe, just maybe, that's what divinity was always meant to be. Not lightning, not wrath, but patience. A god that does not burn or bless, but watches and waits. The sea was never ours. It simply allowed us. And now it watches without offering. It receives without response. It absorbs every question, every name we try to give it, and returns nothing but its shape. Sailors say the waves look different now, sharper when angry, deeper when calm, and every ripple feels intentional. Engineers say that's nonsense, but none of them sail. In a hidden monastery by a frozen shore, monks chant once per year, one word, repeated for hours, not aloud, in breath only. The word has no translation, only shape. They say it is the closest sound to the silence beneath the sea. And when they finish, they sleep for 3 days, every one of them. A captain once carved the phrase, "Be still," into the bottom of his boat. He died at sea, but the boat returned, upright, empty, dry, the carving still fresh. So tell the story, or don't. The myth doesn't mind. It is patient. It is water. It will wait. And when the silence grows again, as it always does, you will remember this. You will feel it. And in that moment, you will not ask if gods are real. You will ask if they ever left. And if they did, if even for a moment, know this, they came back. And they came back silent. The myth ends not with a roar, not even with a whisper, but with the knowledge that you were heard. That somewhere beneath the stillness, Poseidon listened.